David Thornburgh back here from Studio C70 at the Committee of 70, where all day we're talking to folks who are in the mix, movers and shakers in the Philadelphia political world, to try to figure out what's going on today, what the aftershocks and implications are going to be, and otherwise just make stuff up as best we can. So joining me is a previous guest, Ali Perelman, Executive Director of Philly 3.0. Ali, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Philly 3.0, broadly described as a political reform organization, has been backing candidates and trying to support some new faces here in Philadelphia. So we'll talk a little bit more about this.
Yep.
But before we do, we have to get to the important stuff, which is when last we talked in November, everyone's hair was on fire talking about the poor quality of the I voted stickers.
Right.
What some people were calling Stickergate, hashtag Stickergate. So tell the story of where is your sticker?
It's a great question, David. Where is my sticker? I was thinking about exactly that on my way over here today, because as I was taking my vest off, I realized that the sticker was no longer there, even though I had only voted maybe 35 minutes earlier.
So this adhesive has like a sell-by date.
You can tell already.
30.
Yours is
it's curling.
But
it's coming off.
Just to flag this again, because we really ought to do this. In New York City, they have an annual competition where amateur and professional designers submit an iVoting sticker that only lives for that one election. And there's 20 finalists, and they have runoff voting, and then they end up producing the winner, and it's like a real thing, and it's always so beautiful.
And we can't even get the stickers to stick.
No.
Okay, well, let's not try to color our conversation with such sort of downer news.
No.
I have to say, though, last time I believe I committed publicly that the Committee of 70 would lead the charge on the sticker reform issue.
Great.
And we have not yet succeeded.
And you have our support, David.
Okay. All right. Well, it all begins with one. But we're still on the case because we're not giving up. And very soon you're going to see on Twitter, you're going to see pictures of forlorn I voted stickers, in the curb,
it's like January 2nd when you just see the remnants of the Mummers Parade caked into the curb.
It's shameful. But we'll get off that. So let's go from the little picture to the big picture. So what you've been working and been anticipating this election day, working on a bunch of candidates and campaigns.
Yep.
How do you sort of frame this election? What is this about? What are the critical issues, questions, themes, currents that we should be paying attention to?
Coming to my answering of that question is going through the lens that I put pretty much all questions about local politics through, which is this a moment where we're going to start to see some real political reform, if you define that as sort of like insider versus outsider activity. And this ballot, even more so than in 2015, and I really think you can only measure this in this election cycle. I'm wildly impressed by Rebecca Reinhardt's win, but it's almost like there's not enough when you only have the DA and controllers races on the ballot. You need the level of the variation from sort of high information on the mayor's end to really low information on the city commissioner's end, I think, to make any real claims about whether outside forces are starting to break through.
I'm reminded of that I think in math they say it takes 3 points to create a line.
I think just 2, but yeah.
Well, okay. I wasn't very good at math. But yeah, so if you only have one,
it's not. It's sort of too wobbly, too squishy. But what we have now is a ballot that's huge, and the results I don't think are going to be. They could be squishy on the other side, and I would define squishiness in that context as being the sort of results where you're there are moments of change, we're gesturing toward change, but holistically that's not the outcome of the race. But it could be, or it could be that is not in fact the case. It could be that even though all sort of trends suggest that this is going to be a relatively low turnout election, it could be the case that turnout is high in exactly those parts of town where you're most likely to see support for non-traditional candidates, kind of however we want to define that.
We were talking shop around the office the other day, and 4 years ago was my first municipal elections committee of 70. And I was thinking about what has changed between 2015 and 2019, which is really quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
First and foremost, the presidential election in 2016, but then Rebecca Reinhardt's race in 2017, which took, I think, a lot of folks by surprise.
Everyone. Anyone who says they were not surprised by the outcome of that race is lying.
Are the same people who said, like, I told you Donald Trump was going to win all along. I knew this. And Krasner's race, which had sort of a different dynamic to it.
Yep.
So part of what we're trying to understand in 2019 is kind of and the other thing was the really surprising and robust turnout from the midterm elections in 2018. Yeah. So we're trying to see, of those, what's going to kind of propel or, kind of characterize this race today. Yeah. And there's pluses. And then, of course, the other thing that's different from 4 years ago is, let's just say that by all appearances, there's a less competitive mayoral race than there was then. So,
and having the lack of competition at the top of the ticket really hurts.
Yeah.
And what I'm hoping to see is that in the parts of town where people have demonstrated over the last 3 cycles, 16, 17, and 18, that they are really engaged, really starting to flex their political muscle, I'm hoping that for those folks, the fact that the mayor's race is basically a fait accompli is not in any way a deterrent, because it really, I don't think for them was about the mayor's race at all in this cycle.
Yeah.
There was other stuff that they were interested in. They may have fallen in love with a city council candidate or a candidate for city commissioners or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But there is just there's a level of enthusiasm that you can only get by a competitive race for an executive office.
No, that's right.
And we just obviously don't have that right now.
Yeah. Having said that, though, I mean, we did a lot of interviews with city council at large candidates, probably 20 of them.
So most of them, yeah.
And you need to get a life.
This is my job, David.
I was just impressed with the energy, the enthusiasm, the number of first-time candidates who say, I just felt like he needed to do this.
And real people, too.
Yeah, real people.
Yeah.
Real folks that are, trying to do the right thing for the right reasons. And then, likewise, the city commissioner's candidate, I mean, this is a much different field than it was 4 years ago.
Very much so.
I don't think it's that much bigger, but again, there's let's just say, a spectrum of candidates.
There is. And 4 years ago, Stephanie Singer was not on the ballot,
right?
Because she
got kicked off.
She was never she didn't fulfill the petition part of the process, and so there weren't any candidates. And can we name candidates here on this conversation?
Yeah.
There weren't any candidates like Khalil Williams and Jen DeVore, who are, at least in my estimation, really starting to galvanize folks around their vision for that office and the reform that needs to happen in that office. The reform that needs to happen in that office is it goes away, but in the interim, there is something different about the way that they are talking about what they're doing. And Stephanie got there too. I don't want to be dismissive of what she was able to pull off, which was also incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
It feels maybe like what's happening now is more firmly rooted in a different and more hardy political sensibility among folks.
Of course, the other thing around that is, again, difference from 4 years ago, is we've had both legitimate and spurious claims and circumstances around election security.
Yep.
And one issue that's come up in the commissioner's race is the voting machine procurement, which has turned people out. I never would have predicted there were that many people energized by that.
That there would
issue.
be and we've talked about this a lot in our conversation about the commissioner's office and what at the root of the root, what it takes to get people to care about it. Because so much of the problem is a function of the fact that no one knows what it does, no one cares who's in that office, and so you just end up, it becomes the lowest of low information
So
races.
now this voting machine issue has given people a reason to
and
care.
And it is so actually topically specific. It's not even the corollary is not when we found out Anthony Clark was a no-show employee, because that was about the commissioner's office insofar as he nominally was running the commissioner's office, but it wasn't about the job. This is about like the inner workings of elections and like, oh, these people actually do like have a pretty intimate relationship with the way that this whole thing plays out. And I don't know that a typical voter necessarily understood that.
Well, and again, the backdrop of like real election security issues, and you know, the reason we're procuring new voting machines is because we realized, maybe long after we should have, that we don't have a paper backup for what happens on the machine. So that's how we got into this whole thing.
You ask the machine, are you sure you're right? The machine's like, yeah, I'm definitely right.
Well, or I heard someone say that, you know, a recount on the existing voting machines is kind of like pushing total on the calculator twice.
Yes.
Like, you know, you get 3 + 3 = 6. Try it again. 6. Okay, must be good.
Nothing to see here.
It's not exactly a recount. So let's try this just to sort of like focus a couple things. Like, you know, pretend it's a week from now. What are a couple of things that that are on your mind that if they break a certain way should be, let's say, promising signs of change, sort of first robins of spring, if you will?
There are a few things that I would put in sort of like roughly the same buckets. So bucket number one is actual outsiders beat actual incumbents or really strongly party-supported candidates. So in that bucket, you would put a challenger beating an incumbent in a district council race. You would put anyone beating Lisa Dealey, who's the city commissioner, and Omar Sabir, who's the party-backed candidate for commissioner. That would be sort of another place where you're taking sort of like it's a win for one side against the other, right? Where it's like very clearly articulatable camps, right? That's sort of bucket number one. For me, it's difficult to apply the same calculus to the at-large race just because there are 2 open seats. And so 2 new folks are getting in regardless. And I think there's sort of general agreement about who is in the running for those seats. And so I don't think that there's as much of a way to say candidates in column A are indicative of a more reform-minded electorate or change-minded electorate than column B. I think it's a little bit too ambiguous in terms of how you would parcel out those folks. But then the other thing that's going to be really interesting to see is, and this is what we talked about this last time, in fact, whether the voting patterns that we've seen develop from 16 to 17 to 18 hold to 19 insofar as where it is on the map that people are really overperforming and where are they underperforming. So we were seeing last time around what I was calling the sideways T, which was West Philly through Center City and basically River Wards down through South Philly as being like unusually politically active relative to how voters in those parts of town typically performed. We're putting aside Northwest here because it really is just an animal unto itself, and it's just going to be the strongest performer.
Sort of a bellwether.
You can kind of just be like, yep, you're going to do what you're going to do. You're going to outperform everyone. Let's like take you off the table. Right. But then you look into other parts of town to see, the Northeast used to put its thumb on the scale in terms of having a tremendous influence in the outcome of elections. I don't think that's going to happen today. It certainly doesn't look like it's going to happen based on Jonathan Tannen's tracker.
I'm glad you reminded me to make that point. We're a big fan of Jonathan Tannen's and his 66wards.com site. Jonathan has a live turnout tracker, which relies on people to let him know when they voted and what number they were in line, and he feeds that into an algorithm that he uses to try to predict where the current number of voters are and ultimately what the voters are going to be at the end of the day. So it's a great tool. Jonathan does this as a volunteer, and if you want to share your data with him, it's all anonymous, of course, but it's helpful even as we go through the course of the day. Dave Davies wrote a pretty interesting piece the other day looking at some new sort of insurgent organizations that are involved in the campaign. I mean, yours would be one. the Reclaim Philly folks, and also the 215 People's Alliance. These are sort of progressive, organized, progressive, kind of campaign organizations, really. And he pointed out that some of the candidates are actually contributing to those organizations to get their help on turnout and handing out sample ballots and so forth. What should we make of that? Positive? How does this affect the existing, we'll call them distribution channels and money-raising machines?
It is always positive to increase the number of distribution channels, I would say.
I was leading the witness.
You were leading the witness. But I would, their model, at least from an outsider's perspective, is pretty interesting. They're basically acting as a field operation, like a vendor for a number of the candidates that they're supporting. And so sort of like they endorse the candidates, and the candidates provide the financial resources to run the field operation to help. And it's a little, the idea I would imagine is that it would be synergistic. Listen, what's broken about the ward system isn't that there is such a thing as the ward system.
Right.
What's broken about the ward system is this sensibility that the way that it works best is for voters to walk up to their polling place, be handed a sample ballot that they follow blindly, and that's at the end of the day. Well,
and that I know this is an issue for you too, that those endorsements heretofore are generated through an opaque behind-the-scenes process.
A process that at least initially included the endorsement of Jewel Williams, right?
Yeah.
Until there was enough of a public pushback, a fully anticipatable public pushback, by the way, that the party rescinded its city/county endorsement of Jewel, but of course empowered the wards to do whatever they were going to do. And so, you have a bunch of wards that have endorsed Jewel Williams and have him on their sample ballots. I mean, that's what's broken about the system. But the bones of it, and we've talked about this a bunch, the bones of it are just like, that's the framework of grassroots politics. And I think there was this maybe swing in terms of a sensibility around what moved voters. There was this really sort of heavy swing in the direction of just win the air war in as much as possible. And, we've moved back appropriately to a place where we're treating voters with a little bit more respect in the way that we're interacting with them. And not expecting that TV ads alone are going to do it. And also not expecting that they're going to take a piece of paper and just look at numbers. I mean, I've heard about sample ballots that don't even have names on them.
Just numbers.
They're literally like bookmarks of numbers. And that's it.
I always say this is not the democracy that Thomas Jefferson had in mind.
No.
You give me an opening for another plug. We have this great little tool that we call our digital ballot tool, which allows you to either on your phone or on your computer, take a look at the candidates, learn a little bit about them, and then create your own sample ballot, your own digital sample ballot that you can take to your polling place, or you can share with your friends. And it's sort of a way around it makes the person handing you the piece of paper at the edge of your polling place more than a little irrelevant.
I don't mean to I literally just spent 4 hours doing that, right? No, but it's just
people do it because it works.
People do it because it works, but it only really works in the service of democracy if it's part of a conversation that includes voters. And directly or indirectly, and if indirectly, as close to representatively as you possibly can, right? And
we're clearly trying to be the little engine that could with this. But understanding, I mean, you only take a recommendation, or the most meaningful recommendations a voter would get is from someone they know and trust.
Of course. And
if they had confidence that those recommendations were generated by some relatively open and informed process.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So one last question, and then I'll let you go. A grizzled campaign consultant who shall go unnamed said to me a few weeks back that he said, look, this is not going to be a high turnout race. There's, from the top down, and he said the main reason is it's too hard for challengers to raise money, partly because of the campaign finance limits that folks like us at the Committee of 70 fought for 10 or 12 years ago.
Yes, but.
Yeah, that's.
The but is, it isn't the existence of campaign finance limits that makes it difficult for challengers to raise enough money to beat incumbents. So by the way, challengers need to raise significantly more money than incumbents to win.
Yeah.
What it is about the campaign finance limits that makes it exceedingly tough for challengers to raise resources at that level is that, number one, we have annual instead of cycle limits. So an incumbent is going to raise
stockpile
for 2, if not 3 years in advance of a race before a challenger is even going to be able to get the first check in the door.
Right.
The way, obviously, that councilmanic prerogative interacts with this stuff is super tricky because folks who would be otherwise willing to support a challenger, recognizing that their name is going to end up on a campaign finance report, in many cases is going to get pretty nervous about that if that person has any interaction whatsoever with, in this case, a district council person, right? And so you are obligating the challenger to work against a system that was designed to protect incumbency, and to do so in the context of a donor base that is disincentivized from supporting challengers. And the outcome, and you sort of like go through that Rube Goldberg machine, and on the other side you get challengers who just don't have the resources when in fact they need a lot of resources. So no, it's not campaign finance report sort of just like per se.
Well, that also sounds like, you know, we could fix the cycle issue, and, you know, lots of conversation around councilmanic prerogative, what we can do about it. But there's hope that we could figure out some way to lessen that.
But the hope relies on electing folks to council who are energized around systems level reform that in many cases operates at their own disadvantage, right? And that's term limits. That's a different kind of campaign finance system. Maybe that's moving toward publicly financed elections, where they are actually and exclusively publicly financed, so everyone is getting the same resources, right? I mean, it's ranked choice voting. I mean, it's just like all of this stuff that we talk about, we talk about, but to get there, you need a system that can permit that.
Well, we always run into the sort of catch-22 of reform, which is to get to the place where you'd like to be, you have to go through the place where you are. You know, you have to win by the rules as they now exist in order to get to the place where you can change those
But
rules,
I'm inspired by the visualization that the Inquirer did, where they broke the at-large, I think they might have done district as well, but at least the at-large candidates around based on their position on issues. And on all of sort of the reform stuff, like the really topical reform stuff, term limits, prerogative, what have you, there really was what I would call like somewhat of like a 10-year generational gap, wherein the incumbents were on sort of one side of the ledger, and then the majority of the challengers were taking a little bit, if not a significantly more reformist bent to their approach to this stuff.
A quick shout out to the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I hope you'll agree with me that they've done some nice reporting. Jonathan Lai, Julia Russo, Chris Brennan done some good reporting on this election, and even the obscure office, Claudia Vargas, that we only learn about maybe once every 4 years, the Registrar of Wills and the Sheriff and the Commissioners and so forth. So at a time when you know, money's tight to fund good journalists, that Inquirer deserves a shout out. So.
And they had the E-Board had one of the better editorials I've read in a while. It was about the Registrar of Wills office, and the argument was if an office exists and it's impossible to determine what the appropriate evaluatory criteria would be as a way to shop between the candidates, then that office cannot be an elected office. Like if it is impossible for voters, reasonable and informed voters, to say like one candidate is any better than any other, you can't elect that person.
You know, we always go back to elections or job interviews. You interview for a job, and then once you get for the job, in theory, there's a set of criteria that on some regular basis you can evaluate how well you're doing the job. But if you get to the job and it's not even clear what the job is,
correct, yes,
which I think is true of the city, has been true of the city commissioners.
Yep.
I'm totally with
Yep.
you. That's an argument
Yep.
to say, well, maybe this shouldn't exist.
Yep. Yep.
All right, Allie Perelman, thanks as always.
David.
It's a beautiful sunny day.
Go vote.
May 21st. Go get your sticker, even though it may only be with you for a few minutes. And we'll do our best to make sure that the stickers stick next time around. So signing off, and we'll see you at the polls, and keep on voting.